Hello and welcome to Hawkeye Nation. This is Hotcast, your Iowa football, basketball, and recruiting podcast brought to you by Go Iowa Awesome and Rivals.com. I'm your recruiting analyst and host and men's basketball beat writer. Coming up tomorrow, once again, at Eliot Clough. Eliot Clough on Twitter. I got those switched around, but Eliot Clough at Eliot Clough on Twitter. There we go. At Adam Jacoby _Jacoby, and of course at Ross WB. Both of those guys joining me here right now on this Monday edition of Hawkcast. Talk a little bit about the game this weekend in Wrigley Field. Iowa taking the 10-7 electrifying victory over Northwestern. Wow. Well, Adam, you and I got to sit in the press box at Wrigley, got to go into the bowels of Wrigley, so to speak, getting in the post-game presser in the batting cage inside the visitors' dugout. It was really cool experience. I'll say that first of all. Secondly, initial thoughts coming off the game. You got to get the recap together for us this week. Lots to take away in a very low-scoring event.
Yeah, there was a lot to take away from it. One of the things that really jumped out at me was how much the Hawkeye fan base showed up to that event. I was expecting that to be a much high event. And, usually it is when it's at Ryan Field. I was not expecting it to be to the level that it was on Saturday. I mean, you guys were both there too. Conservatively, that was 80% Iowa fans. And it's probably closer to 90. It was unbelievable how much they controlled everything except for the AV of the game. The Hawkeye, that was the only noise you could hear that was going to be pro Northwestern for the entire game. And bless them for trying, but that was a home game for Iowa. And I don't really know if the team wins that game, if it's even a 50-50 fan split. I really don't.
Ross, you were in the thick of it too.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the stadium, the Wrigley experience in the stadium itself kind of it wasn't as, there were Iowa fans in Wrigley, but I don't know how much you guys got to see outside of Wrigley, like in Wrigleyville and the bars and the restaurants and on the L and everything, but it was just complete Iowa everywhere. Like the L was just full of Iowa fans. The Wrigleyville bars were just 99.9% Iowa fans. Like once you got in the stadium, there were some Northwestern fans like, oh, that's where they are. But it was still, like Adam said, it was 80-20 Iowa inside Wrigley. And I agree with Adam that, this was a very close, precarious game, especially in the second half. And, having that very vocal, very, pro-Iowa support there, I think this team definitely fed off that, and that was huge.
One stat that I heard secondhand from the Nisei Lounge in Wrigleyville, one of the bartenders was keeping track of how many people showed up in purple, like trying to figure out how many Northwestern fans were ever just even going to walk into the building. 17. That was it. If I'm lying, I'm dying. And that really underscores how much this was an Iowa event that just so happened to be branded by Northwestern as the Wildcat Classic or whatever. Chicago's Big Ten team. It's never been starker that's a brand statement and not like a factual statement than at Wrigleyville on Saturday. Like that all belonged to Iowa for everything except for the logo on the field and the flags flying around. That's it. Everything else was Iowa.
Well, Chicago's Big Ten team was there on Saturday. It wasn't Northwestern, though.
I had a buddy who was in the stands, and he said that it was 95% Iowa fans as well. I know you were in the stands as well, Ross, but he's also not the brightest, so we'll give the edge to Ross here. So Yeah, it was absolutely wild. I mean, when Michael Wilbon went out and did the whatever the song is, the root for the, and everybody yelled Hawkeyes. That was when it was most evident to me. I mean, that, and then also when Northwestern ran on the field and everybody heard boo.
Yes.
It was, I wasn't expecting that. I mean, I knew it was going to be a large contingent of Iowa fans, but right when that happened, it was like it really clicked as well. This is a home game. LeSean Williams said that post game that he really felt like it was a home game. And of course, that really did take it over the edge, I suppose, in them getting the win. And this is just such another reminder that the margin of error, like it is every week when Iowa plays, the margin of error with this team is so ridiculously thin. Torrey Taylor doesn't have a ridiculous game like he does typically every week. He only averaged 39 yards a punt, if I remember correctly, on Saturday. And it must have been wind. I'm not exactly sure. You could see the way the ball moved in the air was different than it normally does. But that paired with the way Iowa's offense is continually inept and couldn't score when they're in Northwestern territory 3 times in the first half. That margin of error, just you can't even show it. It's thinner than this, guys. It's thinner than that. That's just another example, a peak example against Northwestern, who, granted, 4-5 now under David Braun and has kind of resurrected the program in such a short amount of time, considering how bad they were last year. And he is the interim guy and all those things, but it's still Northwestern. Iowa was effectively at home. That should not have been a 3-point game.
Well, especially, in the first half, the defense was practically, to go a little baseball here, pitching a perfect game. They had just completely dominated Northwestern in that half. They couldn't do anything. And yet it's still 0-0 at halftime because the offense, like you said, they had chances 3 times. 3 times, I think they were inside the Northwestern 35, maybe. There was, and they had a missed field goal, interception, and then I think they ended up punting on the other one. And so that's, the defense is just playing lights out, but again, they need help from the offense, and the offense wasn't giving it to them in the first half.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that of those 3 possessions that ended up empty, one, like you said, they were all inside the Northwestern 35. The interception came from the 26-yard line. Like that was easily field goal range. But in all 3 instances, it was all preceded by a bad negative play for Deacon Hill. One of them was the strip sack and the recovery by Mason Richmond, who was the one that got beat. And if you're going to get beat, you might as well fall on the ball for your QB. You're either doing that or buying him dinner. The second one was that screen pass over the middle that, again, I don't know why it's in Iowa's offense. Like, you can't just say no more screen passes, right? You can't just say that's not part of the playbook anymore. But has that worked at all this year? Has it worked once?
Not with Deacon.
Yeah.
Not even close with Deacon.
Yep. So that was on 3rd down, pushed Iowa back 4 yards, ended up resulting in a doink by, I almost called him Keith Duncan, which is his predecessor. It's closer to the truth than a lot of people understand, by Drew Stevens, led to that doink. And then the last one was that interception, right? So that's 3 bad Deacon Hill plays that turned promising scoring position drives into 0 points. And that could have been enough to make the case, even in Kirk Ferentz's mind, that this wasn't going to work. And yet, 4th quarter, tie game all of a sudden. The 7 points didn't quite end up holding up. It looked like they might. And he goes and leads a game-winning drive. Makes the throw of his life when it mattered the most to a guy that, again, had every excuse to not be in that position at that moment this late in the season, and they got it done. So a little bit of validation after what has been a really, you can't even call it a rough start, a rough majority of the game, like a rough game, really. But Deacon put his nose down, made it happen when it counts, threw to a guy that put his nose down, made it happen when it counts. Something to be said for that.
I want to talk about that play. Before we get to that, I want to talk about the first half, especially that interception. Deacon did say post game that he didn't place the ball well, which he did not. And secondarily, why are you going to Nico Reganey in a one-on-one, man-to-man when he looks to me like I'd have to go back and look, but he looked like the smaller guy in that matchup, one. Two, a 50-50 ball to Nico Reganey? What? And three, I mean, if it's that height, I mean, and with that ball placement, Deacon Hill has repeatedly shown, other than when it's like dire, that he is unwilling to throw the ball away. At least that's what it appears to me. He'd rather throw it into second or like double and triple coverage than throw a ball away, which is why he ranks first, or has ranked up towards the top of quarterbacks that have turnover-worthy plays in the country. He is so unbelievably lucky that that one ball that he tried to throw away wasn't picked and ran back for 6. That was the luckiest play I've seen all season, more or less, for Iowa.
And if that goes Northwestern's way, there is absolutely no telling how the game unfolds from there, because Iowa's not pressing on them with the same amount of we both know what you're going to have to do from here. So yeah, that was unbelievable luck, and that was sort of the point where it looked like, all right, the case might be even made in Kirk's eyes that this is not going to happen, because everything we know about Kirk Ferentz, right, and everything that he wants out of his quarterbacks, he said that the only QB that can get away with making those like turnover worthy plays was Ricky Stanzi. And Deacon Hill himself would be the first to tell you he's not on Ricky's level yet. So that was the point where I was saying this might be it. And if there were more viable options behind Deacon, that might have been it. Yeah. So the fact that Deacon got to him winning drive really felt almost as much a function of the fact that there wasn't really a viable option behind him. And we're not entirely certain who that number 2 is at this point, are we, Eliot?
No, Marco Lainez getting the reps with the 2s in this last game. That's probably something we're going to ask, or somebody's going to ask about tomorrow at the presser, and to get an idea of who is the 2 and who is the 3 right now for quarterbacks. You can't assume exactly what's going on. I mean, who knows? Joe Labus, he was dealing with an injury in the off season, so maybe that's why. Maybe it's re-aggravated. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's just that Joe Labus is not worthy of that number 2 spot, and which is just a bit of a surprise considering what he did in that bowl game, and considering the fact that it's not a bit of a surprise, it's a lot of a surprise, considering that Marco Lainez is a true freshman. And I haven't seen him really play other than in that open practice that we got to attend. But he is not ready. He's a true freshman at Iowa, man. What would make you think that Marco Lainez is ready to take reps with the 1s at this point? If he does and he succeeds, awesome. Great for him. I just don't see it at all yet. And if Joe Labus is really, to quote Chad Leistico, that bad, like he said last week, then Iowa is in quite the spot in terms of their quarterback who's under center. And if Deacon Hill is your best option, man, that's pretty telling.
I was going to give Ross a little bit of.
Oh,
Go for it, Ross.
I mean, I just didn't have anything else to disagree with there. I mean, we've all been watching Deacon for the last 6 weeks, and the struggles are very apparent. You know, like Adam said, the plays at the end of the game were great, and I think it's excellent that he was able to do that, and you hope that that's something he can of. I just don't know that 1 or 2, good plays is enough of a foundation there. But it's very apparent that the rest of this season, these last 3 regular season games and whatever happens after that, it's ride or die with Deacon Hill. So, we just got to hope that you get more of the Deacon that feathered that pass into Caleb Brown, and much, 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 much less of the Deacon that tried to throw that pick 6 and somehow didn't.
What I will point out is this, that one thing that Deacon didn't have to deal with in the Northwestern game was result. We saw him put together that, 65 yards passing for a game is, I'm not going to try to sell anybody. It's 10 for 15 for 65 yards. And one of the criticisms that Hill had gotten was his very, very, very low completion percentage. And so the Fit was able to bring that back up to, 2/3, 66%. Once guys were actually catching the ball, sort of brings it back what Iowa got out of Joe Labus at the Music City Bowl at the end of the season. And it's not, it doesn't even resemble all Big Ten quarterback play or anything like that. But it does look closer to competent for Deacon Hill. It does look like growth. It does look like progress. Does it look like sufficient progress? Ooh. If the scoreboard didn't say Iowa 10, Northwestern 7, you could really make the case that it's not sufficient progress, right? If the scoreboard said 21-10 Northwestern, it would be really, it would be hard to make the case that Deacon had done enough at that point, even though the only thing that's changed there is the fact that Northwestern was on the board that much as opposed to scoring 1 touchdown late in the game. So, does Iowa need to get more out of him, especially over the last 3 weeks? Yeah, absolutely. But at the very least, what we've seen is when the ball is actually getting caught, when it's on these receivers' hands, that one number, like the completion percentage, doesn't look as ugly as it used to. And that is in and of itself a sign of progress, right?
Yeah. I will say this game very, very, very easily could have been 14-7 Northwestern. We were talking about how lucky that pick was. He very well, we know what Deacon does when he's pressing. He throws interceptions. Like that last drive probably would have been a turnover if we're being real, based on what we've seen. And honestly, I'm caught between that. So with that last drive, I'm caught between he did it. Good for him. That's a step in the right direction. And 2, you're a D1 FBS quarterback. You should be able to make that throw to Caleb Brown. That we're giving him flowers for a 23-yard completion to Caleb Brown. That's where we're at. And he was open. He was open. It wasn't like he was threading the needle.
It was a little bit tough. Like he had to put it over a defender. It was not his. Like I've seen him miss easier throws than that. We saw him miss easier throws than that on Saturday. So the fact that, especially for a guy who has openly said, some of it is a matter of composure. Some of it is a matter of, not being too amped up to put the ball where it needs to be. And, the situation doesn't get a whole lot bigger than that. Tie game, last minute of the fourth quarter. It was a third down throw too, right? As I recall.
Was it? I think it was a first down. I just had the play up because there was that 8-yard gain to Raghini on that like quasi screen pass, and then it was 2 plays later that he made that throw.
Okay. Yep. All right, then we'll take that aspect out of it. Regardless, though, clutch throw, and he didn't let the moment get too big for him. So that in and of itself, Eliot, a D1 quarterback should be able to complete that pass. Agreed. And, target was open. Agreed. But those are bars that Deacon hasn't always cleared this year. And the fact that he did it when he had to, the team needed him to, is, it's not clearing the high bars at all. But it's a step in the right direction. And, we even heard after the game, Deacon Hill said, our growth might not be fast enough for people outside our building, which I think was code for every single fan and media member. But there's only so much of that is in his power to control, to improve. It would be nice if he was throwing like Peyton Manning by the Illinois game. It's an unrealistic standard of success at that point, especially for somebody like him, who is, again, like we say, Marco Lainez, he's only a true freshman. This is only Deacon Hill's first year in Iowa City too, and only his second year in college football. No, he was getting redshirted third, yes, but had a weird high school experience behind that too. Like, doesn't have a whole lot more experience than Marco Lainez, like vanishingly little more than that. So, it is fair to say that Deacon Hill's play has not been up to par. Absolutely fair. And I think anybody in that quarterback room, if the cameras aren't on, would tell you the same thing. But I think it's also, if we're going to keep it fair, we have to be fair about what the incremental progress should look like over the course of the season. It won't look good enough to make Iowa fans happy. Well, I think we can all agree on that. But if the Rutgers game looks better than the Northwestern game did, it's at the very least something. It's green shoots. It's not a tree, but it's a little leaf poking out of the dirt. And that might be about all that you can ask for out of this situation, which, again, is not what the Iowa coaches had in mind when they put the roster together to begin this year. Not what they had in mind at all. And, the fact that they're keeping it afloat to this extent, which, and we've seen what that entails to, things like scores and total scoring margin, that sick of stuff. But, look, they're 7-2. They're winning. It's a little nuts.
I will say, in regards to the late throw there from Deacon and that situation, it was pretty striking. This happens, 2 weeks after his last game, the Minnesota game, where he and the Iowa offense were in an extremely similar position. They needed to get 20-30 yards to have a field goal to win the game against Minnesota. There's some differences. They're coming off the emotional letdown of the Cooper DeJean punt return touchdown that wasn't, and everything. So there was, not quite the same scenario there, but broadly similar situations. We know what Deacon did against Minnesota. It was disastrous. And here, he gets the completion to Raghini, and then he gets the completion to Caleb Brown. And 4 plays later, Drew Stevens is just drilling the game-winning field goal. So, that does feel like a definite moment of progress for Deacon, from where he was even 2 weeks ago against Minnesota. Again, the question is just how effectively can he build on that moment, or the other small moments like the 10 of 15 completion percent. What can he do with that over these next 3 games to elevate the Iowa offense to a position where, the defense doesn't have to be so damn perfect for Iowa to be able to win a game,
Yeah,
Exactly.
we talk about what happens to the margin for error, the way that this team is set up. There's a lot of error, but the offense just takes all of it. The margin of error is only like small for the defense and the special teams. And you're absolutely right. This was a game that if Iowa, just plays a haphazard game on defense, a mediocre game, it's probably Northwestern winning this one, their Wildcat Classic.
With talking about the offense, 2 things we have to address before we move on. Cooper DeJean, 2 offensive snaps. Secondarily, Caleb Brown caught a freaking ball. Whoa. I tweeted both times, both of those scenarios. I tweeted in all caps and said, this is not a drill.
Yeah.
Because it's been 3/4 of the season at this rate, and Caleb Brown just catches his first pass. I mean, following what supposedly happened a few weeks ago, to him finally getting a large portion of snaps this time around comparatively to what we've seen before. That's big and a step in the right direction, where we may actually see that start to continue. And also, in regards to Cooper seeing the field, I think that is definitely a byproduct of Brian getting canned and him saying F it, maybe not, but that's the way I initially see it. Like, screw it, I'm out. Cooper, get some snaps.
I mean, I think there's a little bit of that. I think it's also, after the bye week, Iowa does sometimes like to throw in a few wrinkles, by Iowa standards. And I think the Cooper stuff could have been a little bit of that. But, I'll tell you what, the fans were really excited to see Cooper on the field on offense. So, that definitely felt good. And if you're trying to buy a little bit of fan goodwill back, that doesn't hurt. And the Caleb, I mean, you talk about guys that could use some confidence and hopefully, flow that into bigger and better things. The receiving core is obviously looking for someone to stand out and make plays. If Caleb Brown can, if this can jumpstart that, Godspeed.
One thing that also sort of needs to be mentioned, we mentioned the 2 snaps for Cooper DeJean. I believe that's 2 more than Caleb Johnson got. And that was a little bit of a surprise, especially because we saw Jazz Patterson getting a few carries there too. And there was one play, I don't know what they call it, but it's essentially a sprint off tackle. But it's definitely one where it's designed to get the running back full speed before he hits that hole. And we've seen them use it to great effect with Caleb Johnson last year and this year. Ran it for Jazz Patterson, and he got tripped up by his ankles for 3 yards. But that was historically a big gainer for Caleb. And that was a moment where it's like, hey, wait a second. We haven't seen number 2 at all, have we? And we ended up not seeing him. So some questions have to be asked there, because for all of what you want to say about how the offensive personnel has been managed, and we did see more Caleb Brown, we did see Cooper DeJean, but none of that criticism of the offensive personnel involved too much Caleb Johnson, right? Like, it's like, get that guy off the field. That's never happened. So I'm curious to see what the fact that he wasn't in that mix on Saturday. Very curious to learn what that portends for the rest of the season. And, we have to say it, and for beyond. Might mean nothing, might be something.
The boot obviously wasn't mentioned on the injury report at all. Not out, right. Not questionable. So that's of note. And I did see him on the bike at one point in time, so it looked like he was warming up and then didn't get in the game again as well. That was in the second half, I believe. And 3 more injuries on the offensive line. Mason Richman out, Bo Stevens out, Logan Jones in a boot and in street clothes after the game. Bo Stevens, when you have to bring a cart out and you're not putting weight on it, not a good sign. We don't exactly know what's going with Mason Richman. I'm assuming we're going to find out more again about all those guys on Tuesday.
One more too. Rusty Feth.
That's true.
In a sling too. That's 4 offensive linemen in 1 week. That we've talked all year that offensive line had been like the source of stability on offense. And now we don't even know what the last 3 weeks are going to look like across the board. We really don't know. So you're right. We're going to have to see what's coming out of that.
Yeah, I think, one thing with the Caleb situation and the offensive line, we should have a depth chart for this week in a little bit, right? So that maybe will give us a little bit of indication, but certainly something you guys will be asking about tomorrow for sure. So,
yeah, Rusty did come in after Bo got hurt. Rusty came back in later in the game, so I guess I didn't think of him for that reason.
Sure.
Maybe a little more telling that it's not quite as bad. He and I think Mason were considered questionable. I think I heard Weitzel say that at one point in time. I think Scott asked him about it, but that is concerning when you've got an offensive line that already struggles, that you lose that sort of depth. When you have Nick DeJean playing left tackle, not ideal. He is one of the more flexible guys on that offensive line. You don't want him at anything other than guard.
What was the Logan Jones injury?
I don't know.
Right
he
foot.
He was wearing a boot. I guess, yeah, we do know. Right foot. He was wearing a boot.
Right lower extremity, might be ankle. I don't think we heard anything
got it
more specific than boot.
Right. I didn't hear anything on Mason Richman either. So did you, Adam?
No.
Okay. Well, hopefully we'll find out here sooner rather than later. You mentioned the thing about the offense in terms of stability, being the offensive line. Well, now the only thing that has been relatively stable is the wide receiver room. In terms of offensive line and production, or in terms of health and production. Yeah, brutal, dude. Oh God. So just a season where the injury bug has plagued this team every which way. We'll see how it goes and what we find out later today, and of course tomorrow with this team. Anything else you guys wanted to hit on regarding this game and maybe outlook for the football squad going into Rutgers this coming week? Of course, we'll have a preview pod for that on Thursday, but regarding this game.
I just was curious to see who you guys thought stood out on defense. I thought Jay Higgs had a really good game, like he pretty much always does. But from press box were there guys that were really, jumping off the field for you.
Yeah, I think number one has to be Jay Higgins. The stats were there. Was in the mix on that goal line stand, and he talked after the game about, there was one play where I actually had them dialed to the wrong tight end or something like that. Like, he was calling attention to a pre-snap call that he had missed, and then apparently Northwestern audibled it into the correct call. But he wanted to talk about him like not doing the like lining things up perfectly. But if you watch that stand, he is the first one across that line. As soon as Northwestern snaps it, he's jamming his gap. He is so active and instrumental in Iowa making those stops, and will never take the credit for it. It just doesn't seem like the sort of guy he is. But watch it again and just look for number 34, because he is making plays. He's blowing things up, and there's just no getting past him. Also, a little bit of a shout out to Y.A. Black, that I thought he is really, really coming into his own this season on the defensive line. He was primed for it, and Noah Shannon's whole situation has made it easier for him, or at the very least has meant more snaps for him. But at the beginning of the year, the defensive lineman that I thought was going to take the most advantage of, sort of pared down rotation was Deontay Craig. I thought we were going to see, 8-9 sacks out of Craig at this. But what we've really seen is Mac rising as a disruptor in the first 3 gaps within that technique. Just blowing things up, moving that point of attack, and often to the extent that it turns into a sack, that it disrupts the passing game. So I thought he looked fantastic against Northwestern, that the Wildcats really, really had difficulty blocking him, keeping him blocked. And he got rewarded with a sack, which is great. And he's been piling up those big flashier stats over the last couple weeks. But you just watch him snap to snap, week to week. He's continually moving that point of attack. And that's exactly what Iowa needs on the defensive front.
Well, you mentioned the point of attack, and I'm glad you brought up the defense, that goal line stand, because we really, have to talk about that. I think it probably gets overlooked a little bit because they went on and scored a touchdown 3-4 minutes later on the subsequent drive they had. But that was still a
22-yard drive.
Yeah, 22-yard drive. But that was still just a phenomenal defensive sequence by the Hawkeyes, backed up to the half-yard line essentially, and just stuffing them 4 straight times in between lots of divot work and maintenance work on the field. That was one of the more ridiculous things I've seen in a football game in a while.
So with all of that said, I will redact 14-7. Very easily could have been 14-7. It very easily could have been 21-7 with that goal line stand. And who knows more? I mean, you talk about momentum. Also, the divot, the infamous divot, I've never seen anything like that. The amount of times that I've said that this season, the Cooper DeJean return, the divot. I've watched a lot of football in my life. You guys have watched more, but I've never seen, let alone in back-to-back games, stuff like that happen. I'm kind of surprised it hasn't happened more. I mean, granted, most games are on turf fields now as opposed to natural grass, but that was crazy. I was thinking after they got it taken care of the first time, that was crazy. We're moving on. No, spoiler alert, that did not happen. And we, Adam and I went on the field after the game and checked it out. It was just sand.
Yeah.
It was just, they filled it with sand and packed it down as much as they could. And that was it.
Was that where third base should have been on the baseball field, or?
It was certainly on the third base line. Like we were just looking straight down to the foul pole. So yeah, that's part of it. The only other time, Eliot, that I've seen something like that was once again at a field that wasn't necessarily a football field or a multi thing. It was, I want to say it was Clemson and Ohio State, or it might have even been Michigan and Ohio State, but it was somebody at the goal line in a postseason game. I want to say about 2016, 17, 18, and it was either the Big Ten championship, which probably shouldn't have been the case because that would normally be in Indianapolis. So I don't think it was that. So it was either that or a college football playoff game. And I'm pretty sure it was an Ohio State game. But yeah, that's the one other time that I've seen it all come up like that. And again, it's because that's the sod is not really built for a scrum of that nature, 3 tons of people just jamming into each other and trying to drive block. But yes, Eliot, this has been on the whole, like, just the moment you start to zoom out and try to take stock of all the weird, unusual, unpredictable, like, you'd be crazy to have tried to predict any season. If we had everything in our preseason, them down on content in August, would have been like, what's this? This acid trip. This is not a prediction. So, it really just goes to show that as much as we can think that we know in July, in August, and as much as things can make sense, once the season starts, you're just hanging on for dear life and trying to rack up as many wins as you can, as well as you can. And it's pretty remarkable that with all of these things going wrong for this team, that we look up and they're 3 games away essentially from winning the division again.
While we're all here, let's list out all the crazy things that have happened this year. Cooper DeJean return, getting called back. The divot. All the freaking injuries. Luke Lachey, Eric All, Caleb Johnson goes down for a little while. Jazz Patterson went down for a little while. All the 3. Cade McNamara, sorry. Yeah. I'm so caught up in Deacon Hill world, I totally forgot. Cade McNamara, 4 offensive linemen yesterday. Help me out here. Any other injuries that are coming to mind right off? Caleb Brown being out for a little while and everybody going into hysterics about that.
The tight end room, even behind All and Lachey, hasn't been healthy either. I mean, we saw Zach Ortworth, who came into the season, the 5th or 6th string tight end, but as a freshman, and he was out there he had to throw a block on a 4th down play. Didn't work out great, but that was it went from next man in to last man in at that point. So yeah, it's just everywhere you look on offense, injury. On defense, heck, the 2 backup cornerbacks have been out for the middle meat of the season. And for as much as we want to see Cooper DeJean take some snaps on offense, we've seen, and Kirk Ferentz has mentioned during his post-game conferences, see what happens when he goes out. And that's you sort of playing with fire there. So when Hilson and Diaz Fernandez, if those 2 had to be taking snaps, or
potentially John Nestor,
or Nestor,
true freshman John Nestor.
Yeah. That could have been as ugly as, the Nebraska game to finish last season.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of other weirdness, Eliot, there's the Cooper touchdown return that wasn't. There was also the one against Michigan State that actually did count and was still, an incredible and just bonkers way to essentially win a football game or end a football game. I mean, everything the Iowa offense does is weird in some way, almost, it feels like. I mean, winning a game 10-7, like in 2023, like, come on, like that's not normal.
Penn State beats them 31-0. That was probably the most normal thing on this weird list, considering all of that. But Brian Ferentz gets fired mid-season, but gets to stick around for the rest of the year
on a Monday.
Yes. possibly losing Kirk Ferentz, but then he goes ahead and releases a statement and goes on the radio show and says he's sticking around. The Cade McNamara injury in the kids' day, not just like in practice, but we saw it. Everybody saw it.
Yeah.
And ended up mirroring the injury that took him out for the entire season too. Exact same play. Cruel foreshadowing. And all of the twists and turns that have come from the Noah Shannon situation too. I mean, that in and of itself is its own soap opera. And we still don't have resolution on it yet. It's November 6th. We still don't have resolution on it.
That is it's coming this week, right? That was the last we heard.
Allegedly.
Right.
Allegedly.
It's supposed to. It was supposed to come last week. So there's that. And obviously all the transfer portal Kirk, if we're going back to the offseason, going full in on the transfer portal. Additionally, DeJean Parker supposed to come in and probably contribute. He's injured in his first practice in the spring. There was another thing I was going to mention that I cannot remember for the life of me. I think it was something going on in the whole betting situation in itself, and seeing Arlen Bruce and go on and leave, and now he can't play. Brody Brecht chooses baseball.
Probably for the best, but yeah, that's another thing that you have to account for now.
Yeah.
And what I feel like I'm missing more, Ontario Thompson gets hurt after blocking punts, and he had another block punt yesterday. We didn't even talk about that gift of a possession for the Iowa offense. Go ahead, Ross.
Yeah, I mean that's how they got the touchdown, right? I mean, Thompson blocks the punt, sets them up with phenomenal field position, and then the offense is finally able to get it in the end zone there, which they needed to do. He's just been I don't remember a guy that could block kicks as well as him since like Broderick Binns and his insanely long arms from about 13 years ago or so. He was unbelievable. But Ontario Thompson, I mean, he does have long arms, but I don't recall them being freakishly long. But he just has really good timing and technique, it seems like. So he's been
athletic,
phenomenal on special teams. Yeah. And special teams, you want to talk about, just kind of crazy things. Torrey Taylor, I mean, he had a bad game on Saturday. I think he'd be the first to say that, I'm sure. But what we've seen him do the rest of the year is just incredible. I mean, all the kicks he's down inside the 20, inside the 10, inside the 5. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Anything else? I feel like we've got to be missing something.
Probably. It's been a weird year for sure.
I mean, the fact that Iowa went into Wisconsin and essentially rushed for 3 times as many yards against the Badgers than they did against Utah State, right? That it's weird. It doesn't track logically that they would be able to do that. And the fact that Iowa's offensive line, go ahead.
Deacon Hill is a Wisconsin transfer, goes back into Madison, and they win. It's not like he played the game of his life. I tweeted something about he transfers for the team that wouldn't give him practice reps and leads Iowa to win. I knew it was a little hyperbolic. He did not lead them to the victory. Yeah. He played quarterback when they won, but that's all he did in that game. Which was just another weird thing. And throw in Coach Butt, who's formerly from Wisconsin, was on their roster, was a GA, was an assistant quarterbacks coach there as well.
Yeah. And whole jump around thing. I mean, the day after Iowa wins at Camp Randall, there's a women's basketball game at the football stadium, and there's 55,000 people there too. Does that even crack the top 5 happen in the football season? Does it?
I don't. Yeah, it's been a wild season,
to say the least. And there's still plenty to go. Still plenty of basketball ahead as the women play their first non-exhibition game tonight. Men play their first non-exhibition game tomorrow against North Dakota. We got state football playoffs coming up for high school. We got the Rutgers game. The women play in Charlotte this week against Virginia Tech. It's going to be a loaded week for us at iowa.rivals.com. Speaking of which, before we wrap it up here, went and watched 2024 commit Preston Reese, who plays linebacker and quarterback for Monticello. Went and watched him this last Friday as they're headed to the Dome this coming week. Could be a potential matchup of Iowa commits in the 2A championship between Central Lyon, George Little Rock, Reese Vanderzee, Graham Eben, and of course, Preston on the other side. That would be crazy. Would really be intrigued and wanting to go see that game. Preston, 4 touchdowns on quarterback keepers and passed for the game-winning touchdown. They won 34-28 over Minneapolis. And Drew Miller, who was previously recruited by Iowa to play punter but never offered, ends up choosing Georgia after they offered him. I messaged you right after this happened on Slack, talking about Tory Taylor. Drew Miller finished the season averaging 49.1 yards per punt as a high schooler. He had a 55-yard punt down at the 1.
Wow.
As a high school punter
Woods
in Iowa. Yeah. Well, it looked like they've got 2 scholarships left, and we could talk about this on the premium board and maybe not reveal too much here on Hawkcast, but I was impressed. Of course, they've probably got a contingency plan with somebody else from Australia, but we'll see what happens and who they go after to fill that role with Tory Taylor moving on. But like I said, a lot happening this week. We are working on a plan to get it all covered for you. And you can check out all of our coverage on iowa.rivals.com. If you're a premium subscriber, you get all the inside information from us, iowa.rivals.com/subscribe. If you are not a subscriber yet, and while you are here with us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, etc., make sure that you do subscribe. If you're on YouTube, drop that like, drop a comment. If we missed anything weird, or if you have anything to add about this season, let us know in the comments. Let us know what you're thinking about this game going against Rutgers in a couple weeks, or if we missed anything summarizing this Northwestern game from the week. Drop a comment and let us know. Of course, drop that like, subscribe wherever you're at. Leave a rate and review on Apple Podcasts. We know the majority of our podcast listeners listen there. You leave that rate and review, it'll help us out a lot, and it'll make us very happy. So go do that. And that'll be it for us today. So for now, we'll see you next time.